So I wanted to have a conversation with Graham Irwin. Graham is a architect up in Marin County, California. His company is Essential Habitats. Graham and I kind of got introduced to home performance and high performing building and residential design and construction way back in the early 2000s, I think. But here's a little bit about Passive House, code changes and production builders and the challenges of getting Passive House adopted into typical residential construction and remodeling. So check it out. So I wanted to touch base with Graham Irwin. Graham's an old friend of mine from Marin County, practicing architect in Marin. Graham, can you tell us, what was your journey like getting into kind of high performance design and building? And I know we kind of went on that on ramp together. It felt like our little tribe up there, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of good camaraderie. Um, uh, was that a challenge for you as a budding architect to kind of swim in a different direction than everybody else, or was that natural to you, or what was that like?
That's a great question with probably a number of answers.
Sure.
It was certainly a challenge because I didn't, I just couldn't find much information. I spent a lot of time like checking out and reading. There was internet. This must have been 2006, 2007. There was
Right.
internet then, but
Infancy, yeah.
yeah, so a lot of like reading books from the library, mostly from the 70s about passive solar and things
Right.
like that. And it was, I remember connecting with you early on because you were in home performance. But yeah, so on one side of it, it was a challenge because there didn't seem to be a lot of information around.
Right.
And I was also on the sidebar, like PG&E, the utility here had all these classes, so I would sign up and start taking all of those classes. And then there was this organization, well, it's still around, called Build It Green, and
Hmm.
so I'd go to all their classes. So I was going to all these classes and reading all these old books and trying to find whatever I could, and then talking to people that were actually, working in the field like you. So that was the hard part. I think the easy part was it was really motivating to me, and partly maybe the challenge of it was also motivating
Mm.
because I felt like I could,
Right. You love a
discover
good
something.
challenge. Wh-
Yeah,
What were your peers? Were they? Because I know that the meetings you and I attended way back in the day were very few architects, and you and James were one of the few, and um, it was cool that you guys were there, but it was just like disappointing that they weren't half the audience weren't filled with architects. It's like I guess us
yeah,
too as builders were feeling the same way, and it was kind of nice to have this little group, but at the same time, it was hard to crack that egg into the major mainstream. Hey, you guys should do this, or you'd benefit by XYZ, whatever that is.
I think
So
that's
we were
still
both, yeah.
I think that's still a challenge, and frankly, we didn't get to this yet, but um, I through this kind of process, I ended up discovering Passive House, and I was in the first training. Kind of found that
Hmm.
by accident too. The first training in the U.S. for that in
Right.
2008, and I had to go to like this pilgrimage, three different trips to
Right.
Champaign, Urbana,
Right. The
Illinois.
long walk to Illinois.
Right.
Right.
But I came back and I thought, well, this just answers all the questions I had, and it makes
Yeah.
so much
You were
sense.
the Passive House apostle after
But yeah, and
Navi.
I thought, this is going to sell itself, right? Like, if
Right.
people are going to just see how sensible this is, and especially in Marin and especially in Northern California, where we're supposed to be
Yeah.
these
They were very
progressive
receptive.
thinkers and like environmentalists, like why it's just going to be like I just have to
Right.
tell people about it, and
So
that'll be it.
has that ever changed? I know it was tough back then. That's kind of why I got out of the biz, but it was so difficult to build up a base market that would jump on board. But if it wasn't to code,
Uh,
it's like, why bother?
Yeah, it has not. I mean, it's not selling itself.
Mm.
I'm doing a lot of work right now. I think around messaging. I've got a new website and stuff coming out. Don't hold me to the date when it's going to come out, but I'm feeling pretty good
Good.
about putting the messaging in context with what people really value. I mean, and my analogy with this, I've kind of used this in some presentations I've given about like an electric car, right? Like, say you want to sell someone an electric car. Say you want to sell them a really nice electric car, and I think the one I used was this Audi e-tron, right, or whatever. So you've got this really high-end, nice electric car, and you could spend all your time just talking about all the mechanical gadgets underneath the hood, right? And in my presentation, I found like a diagram with everything in German. So there's all these really long German words for all these parts, and you could talk about that. But most of the people that are going to care about that stuff first don't really care what the car looks like. Right. So if you want to sell this car, you've got to sell people on how it feels, what it looks like, what it expresses. Oh, and yes, and it's also environmentally beneficial and
sell them the result, not
all
necessarily.
These other things. So, and I think that's been part of the problem with this whole thing is that it's somewhat preaching to the choir, and the people that are already enthusiastic are already enthusiastic, and it's not that large a chunk of the population. So I think the messaging needs to be updated. I also think that people are becoming more and more aware of the issue, and there's more and more development of this. I mean, when I started, came back from Illinois, I don't know maybe there were 10 passive house projects in the entire
what's the count
country
today, or do you know?
Oh, in the country, thousands for sure. In California there was one, and now there might be 100. Which isn't nearly as many as there should be. But I've worked on maybe 20 to 30. So
of those numbers of passive houses in California, how many are they spread across the state, or are they mostly in specific climate zones? Is it easier to get to? And that's always the trick, right?
Another kind of pet peeve of mine. Yeah, not that I'm not grateful for it, but a lot of, most of the projects I've worked on, and it seems like most of the projects that are around the Bay Area, where, I don't know, people think that it's not necessarily that it's easy to do here, because all the same principles apply, and you actually have to be really careful about balancing summer and winter performance in a way that you might not elsewhere. But you certainly need much less insulation than you would in a more harsh climate. So, in that sense, it's like places in the state where you would get a lot more benefit. Like, why in Lake Tahoe? I think there's one, but why is that not filled with them? It makes no sense to me. So I've been working on trying to spread the adoption of it throughout the state for a while.
I remember teaching up there for Build It Green, and they had a great builders association. It'd be great for you to connect with them. And
in Tahoe,
they were always welcome for Truckee, Tahoe.
A good idea.
It was great. There were a bunch of great guys and gals.
That's
the problem, right? The adoption of what we know is a good idea, what we know is not necessarily more expensive or harder. It's just better planning, better direction, better design, better execution. That's always the struggle when everybody's playing in the norm. And we're always playing on these peripherals. What in today's world, is there a ratio of your clients that are just like your standard run of the mill? I mean, I don't know if they're run of the mill up there, but versus those that are really seeking the credentials or the certifications?
I don't know. I mean, I don't stress the certification that much. I certainly value it, and I let people know about the value, but I don't tend to work. I'd say most of my clients are doing passive house that could be certified if they chose to do it.
They're there. And they're pretty close.
I mean, because again, to me, it just makes so much sense. And it's like, well, I want to do it, but here's certification, and I want to be clever somehow and step back a
Right,
little bit from there because
right.
obviously that will save money. And it's like, well, what, what benefit do you want to give up, or how do you want to compromise this optimal thing? Like, tell me what it is. Do you want it to be less comfortable than it could be, or worse
Yeah,
air quality, or just higher utility bills, or more environmental impact? Like, what
right.
negative thing are you trying to introduce? And I just don't really want to deal with that. It's like, it's pointless to
S-
me, frankly. So
Yeah,
people that don't want to do that, I'm like, hey, that's great, good luck, but we all only have so much time, and I don't want to. I work hard on every project I do, so I don't want to do that with one arm tied behind my back, or knowing that we're deliberately heading for something less than what it could be, um, for no really good reason.
so are you then selective with who you work for and
Oh
with
yeah,
and which project? Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's when you can
yeah,
build up that
yeah.
base where you can be that selective. That's cool. I'm
And you need
congratulations.
to. You need to.
Yeah,
I mean,
especially if you want to stay true to your passion, which is building a better, higher quality product and not only
yeah, but
beautiful
it's,
but performs.
yeah, and it's also just, you have to have a niche, right? I mean, hopefully not too
Right,
small of one, but if you have no identifiable market that you're serving, then you
right.
don't even know what you're going to be doing, right? It's just whatever happens to come along.
And
So
you're kind of in the perfect area, perfect storm where you got the receptive market or the bulk of them. And you got the utilities kind of behind performance to some extent, or at least educating the public. Then you have the state's goals that are pretty high and dramatic compared to the other 49. So you
yes
got
and no.
you're in a good sweet spot.
Yes and no.
Oh,
So I mean,
really?
I was actually just attended a webinar this week, and it was a report. This organization, a couple of people, the authors of it, were talking, and they were commissioned by the Energy Commission, commissioned by the Energy Commission. Well, anyway, to come up with an analysis of why it hasn't been as there hasn't, what areas of the country and the world has there been a huge amount of uptake, and why? What are the barriers, and what's the pathway to having it adopted more in California? So
Hmm.
I think California should be that sweet spot that you're saying, but it hasn't become that yet. You know, New York City's, or well, New York State for that matter, is all in. I'm just kind of paraphrasing from this report,
Right,
which echoed what I already
right.
knew.
I always kind of compare
Pennsylvania,
it.
state of
Mm,
Pennsylvania now, it's a scoring mechanism for funding for affordable housing, and it's almost like you need to do it to get a
right.
project funded. So it's going crazy.
It seems
Vancouver,
like that's
Canada.
what pushed. Right. It seems like that's what pushed the home performance kind of train down the tracks initially was that need up in the Northeast to help affordable housing, help the people freezing in their apartments, et cetera. And
Yeah. And then, kind of coming back to what where you were and what you were doing, like, I don't even know, like if I'm doing my passive house thing, I know who I work with and I have all those people. But if I've got people that call me, or friends or whomever, who just have maybe it's a house where they're not doing enough work to make it to passive house or whatever, it's hard for me to even know who to refer for any kind of performance testing or improvement now. Like that's kind of feels like it's really gone away.
oh, really? A vacuum happened, huh? And nobody
Well, yeah, I mean,
backfilled.
like when you guys are around, you're doing all that stuff, and I remember, like, was it BPI and then Energy Upgrade California and all that stuff, and it's just,
Petered out, huh?
it
Do you
feels that
think? I
way.
mean, we were. I mean, I was kind of looking at it from afar, but it seemed like Cal Green kind of, and that was the state energy code, or now green code attached to the code, as kind of the well, we don't need these other little special shiny projects over here will just, it's the code now, it's higher than normal, it's got all these cool green features in it. Yeah,
It's missing some big things too. Like I
I
said,
know. Right.
I didn't done it trying to promote, trying to promote this kind of performance throughout the state. And I did a study comparing California code, which is supposed to be admirable and is, relatively speaking, to Passive House in all 16 climate zones. And
Right.
and what I found, it depended on the climate zone, but the two biggest benefits were either air tightness with heat recovery ventilation or under slab insulation. That was like
Oh,
number one or
interesting.
number two everywhere. And neither of those things have a code requirement at all.
That's
So
very interesting.
like what you're saying, like Cal Green's a requirement, right? But if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to get a blower door test and have my house, I'd like to have it, air sealed as much as can be done without taking it apart," and again,
Right.
that's kind of where we are. If we want really high performance, it's for major remodels or new construction, right? I mean,
Right.
but someone that wants, like, what can I get done? What sort of good practice or the best I can do to make a really bad situation better? Maybe not ideal,
Right.
but better. It's really hard to find anybody. Like, I guess you know better than me, but it's just really tough to make a living doing that here.
Right. That was always the flaw with the business model, is the market came before, or the horse came before the market.
Hmm. And
That's
it's going to change. I mean, what's the big problem? If you had to name one thing, it might be natural gas is really inexpensive,
right.
and California's done, since the 70s, a really great job with electricity conservation, right? But we're trying to
Nothing like
move
the
to
gas.
electrification now, and we need to. But there are people who know, but it's not common knowledge yet that getting rid of natural gas is going to be a big challenge, because the other problem is, right, we're in our system of measure, right? We use different,
Yeah.
well, not even different units, but units from different systems to measure electricity and natural gas. So it's not even that apparent how much is being consumed, but it's an enormous amount of natural gas, and it's for space heating and water heating residentially,
Right.
partly because of this historic push to conserve electricity, which made a lot of sense at the time. It was really incentivized to use natural gas. That was like the clean
Right.
fuel of the day.
Right.
But to move to zero emission, you can't. I mean, there is a synthetic natural gas, which is a whole other discussion. But electricity is really the bulk of that answer. So that, for that to happen, there's going to have to be a big change, and that may be the time when people are like, "Hey, oh, we need this," and it may well be, and it wouldn't surprise me, and frankly, I'd be okay with it, because it would still be generating these benefits. It may be that California has to come up with their own, has to discover what Passive House is already doing, and consider it their own idea and make it part of Cal Green, and it not be even called that
Right.
anymore, and then it'll be
Yeah.
there. That may be what has to happen. I'm
Yeah.
I'm
Just
a
think of a new term
bystander.
that they'll adopt, and they'll swallow the pill, and they'll say it was
And
theirs.
that's fine. That if it delivers all these benefits and gets the job done, and saves the climate, hey, and gives people these benefits that everyone should have and isn't aware of,
Right.
terrific.
Now, you said earlier that a lot of your projects, they're kind of already close to getting to certification. They already kind of have the built-in specs, as they were.
Yeah.
Is that kind of inherent? And I mean, you've already kind of built that into your discussion with the client, like, "Hey, I'm doing this XYZ package because this is how I design. This is how I want to make sure you're comfortable down the road," and whatever that spiel is. So that's That's
Yeah,
what agreement you guys come to.
in most, yeah, and in most, I don't even know that I get into that much detail with them generally.
So they don't know your insulation choices in a wall or an attic per se, or do you have those kind of
I mean,
detailed?
they will know as I do it, but um, it isn't. It might be, it might be more of an issue if I were in Duluth, Minnesota, or somewhere, with, or
Where that
maybe
topic is a
Miami,
little bit higher on the list.
or
Yeah,
Palm Springs or something where it was really, really hard to meet that certification goal, right? And that, without going into too much of it, that's been some controversy as well, right? Between the
hmm.
U.S. Passive House and the International Passive House is like you have this one standard, and it's really hard in some places and not in others. In any case, in most of the work I do, right, being in coastal California, it's not that hard to meet the standard. I'm not pushing up against some big challenge. So, like I said previously, for me to do work, frankly, I don't even really worry about the standard. I exceed it, generally, because it just seems sensible. It's not that it doesn't take that much, and to
Right.
to like deliberately step it back so it fails in most cases, to me, is just not designing well. And it, and would that save money up front? Probably some, but there's a constant cost versus value equation that you need to bring into.
Sure.
And
Right.
and of course you don't want to waste people's money, and people have budgets that need to be respected as well. But I mean, the real goal, the real task I have is to make sure the budget is met, but my real financial task is to maximize the value, right? The money's being spent. I need to make sure it's spent well and it's optimal, because that,
Right.
there's lots of ways to screw things up, right? I mean, it's sort of I don't know if it's my joke or whatever, but I kind of say, like, construction isn't that hard. It's just really easy to screw it up, right? There's a million ways
Yeah.
to do it wrong. So
Right. A lot of people
that's
do.
the challenge, is like figuring out how to do it right and predicting where things might go wrong and all the rest of it. So yeah, value maximization to me just says it doesn't, in most of these circumstances, it doesn't make sense to make
To
this
do it
building
to not do it the
right.
right way.
Like
Right.
what, again, like I said, what do you want to get rid of? What you want your air, you want worse air, or you want to be uncomfortable,
Right.
or you want
Right.
to, end up spending more in extra utility bills over the lifetime of this building by orders of magnitude than you're saving up front.
Right.
Like it's, like construction costs aren't linear, right? So like if you're already insulating, it doesn't cost twice as much to double that. So
Right.
it's just finding those optimal spots. And again, I'm not really, I have the certification standards in the back of my head, but it's not what drives my thing.
It's
I'm
right.
optimizing.
It's not your hood ornament. You're just
Yeah.
going in knowing that that's in your quiver of stuff that you can pull out, and you know it, and you're building it into to everything you want
And
to.
I've developed some proprietary optimization software, so I can tell exactly where the low hanging fruit is, and just by navigating that, the rest of it kind of takes care of itself.
Is that? I mean, I'm not going to pry, and you can clue us in later. But is that based specifically on climate zone, or what are your kind of your indicators? Your
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's, and I don't know, I'm trying not to get too technical with it, but the original passive house energy model, or widely, there's one before that, but the most widespread one is called the Passive House Planning Package, or PHPP.
mm-hmm.
And it's an Excel-based, it's this monstrous spreadsheet. And so
it's that tool you're using.
It is,
that
but I've sort of developed my own front end spreadsheet for that, and it does what's called sensitivity analysis for me. So it'll, I'll put in whatever the parameters might be, and maybe to make it simple, let's say it's
Right.
just roof, wall, and floor insulation. Maybe there are many more things than that, but just there might be those three things, and it will adjust those values for me and show me how the results respond. So I can tell, if the curve is really steep on an improvement,
Right.
well, I maybe ought to look at that one. If there's something really flat, adjusting that value is not going to make much difference. And the whole thing is like trying to find that low hanging fruit and find that optimal balance, and
Yeah, that's
don't spend a
great.
lot of time like turning dials that aren't doing anything. And it's actually another thing I found in that study with code is that a lot of the code measures are actually meet or exceed what you need for passive house in many
Hmm.
climate zones in California. So
So some of those levers are already pulled, and you just got to
they're
find the ones
beyond,
that.
they're
Yeah.
past, right? And the problem is, well, one, you're spending money on that where you could be spending it elsewhere. And two, if they're seeking, as they continue to seek more and more improvements, as they will, if they keep turning those knobs and ignore the ones that like air tightness and slab insulation, for example, if they
Hmm.
keep turning these other knobs, it's not even just bad. It gets worse and worse and worse, and you get less and less improvement for
Oh, interesting.
more and
Right.
more investment in those things. So when you get way out beyond diminishing your point of diminishing returns, it's back to this optimization. And I think, to me, when I look at passive house, or when I think of passive house, it's not from the technical point, it's not these particular targets, or those targets are in there. It's this optimization. It's a point of optimization where all of these measures have been brought together to
Right.
their logical point.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. I mean, we used to do that just for HVAC, is make sure we're hitting that, that common point of best performance, best value, and you're doing it for the whole project, or the whole structure,
Right.
the whole address, which is cool. Is that California centric, your tool, or
No,
is it?
I mean,
It could
no,
be
it works
anywhere.
on, yeah, it's just
It's
taking that
a heating
energy
degree
model, and
days or what? Yeah.
it just takes the energy model, and the energy model works anywhere, and it's just kind of automating the inputs, automating the
Hmm.
adjustment. So it'll like again, let's just say it's roof insulation, and my goal is 12 inches. It'll automatically try it from like a tenth of that up to 200%. So it'll go from like 1 inch up to 24 inches, and this is all automatic, so you don't need to do anything
Sure.
very
Right.
time consuming. But show you like heating, winter energy consumption or summer energy consumption or whatever.
Based on that
It'll just
thickness.
show
Right.
you how that changes as you make that adjustment. And we're visual animals, so looking at a
Right.
curve is a lot
Right.
more informative than like just like massive amounts of data.
Yeah, you need that kind of black box in the background doing all that
Right.
data crunching to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
you don't really want to see all those numbers. You want to see a graph, right? And you see the
right.
graph,
Right.
and you know what it is and sort of how to do it. And it's combined with intuition and experience, of course, but it's just lets you figure out exactly what you're doing. And if you're challenged, right? Like I did a project in Alaska, like in Valdez. No, it wasn't Valdez, Alaska. It was I don't remember the name of the town, but way up north, and it had something like 2 or 3 hours of sunlight a day
Oh
at the
God.
pit of winter. I mean, hard, right? And in situations like that, you're like, well, what knob do I have left to turn? And
Right.
it's usually not a mystery. You don't want this to be like, hey, this told me something that it makes no sense
Yeah.
to me, but I'll just go with it anyway. It
Right.
confirms what you already know, but helps you quantify that, I think.
No, that's such a cool methodology to kind of bypass that whole. Because I think that's been the. I mean, from looking at it from afar, that hesitation for the young architects to jump on board was just that assertion, that analysis of the data to say what is the best lever to pull. I don't have that in my brain, so I'm depending upon the software to tell me.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody wants. The builders that I work with all the time, they just tell me what to do. They don't design much. They just want to be told what to build, and they'll build it. But
Well, to some degree, yeah. I mean, the other sort of piece of my process is really involving the builder in this for the part that they know best, which is cost, right? Like having, sitting
right,
back and like hypothesizing with software about what the most cost-effective way to construct something. I mean, sometimes you need to do that for big theoretical studies, but for an actual project, I mean, my question would always be to like a room full of builders: is there any builder in here that would bid a construction job based on some software spitting out a number for you? If you had no idea, you just type it in, put the address in, and you would, there's no one that would do
right.
that. They all
I
want
get,
to, because it's an art as well as a science, right? And
sure, right,
it's
right.
way too complicated to have an algorithm do that.
I
The
guess I should
algorithm,
have preempted that definition by saying my builder is the production builder who's doing 10,000 homes in a state a year. So they don't really pause to do a whole lot of planning and analytics. They just
but they
pump
should,
it out.
because
And
they're
I
building,
totally agree with you.
if
That's
they're
kind of why I
doing
got in the biz, is to maybe
right,
change the
yeah.
course of that ship a little bit, if anything.
If they're doing
Um,
10,000 units a year, and you save them, I mean, in fact, it's a stronger argument there. If you're doing a
I
one-off
know.
project, the
Yeah.
savings might be there, but they're not. They're not. Multiply those savings by 10,000. It
Right.
becomes a really
So we
compelling.
might not get them to zero. There are some builders, nationally that are kind of looking at that horizon and have their sights on it, which is encouraging. It's, one of the pack, but you
Mm-hmm.
have the privilege of working with, uh, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just custom homes or smaller projects, or, medium-sized projects that aren't replicated over and over and over. This is just one project with its own set of characteristics and climate zones and needs and all of that. Whereas the guys that I'm talking to are like, we just build them and sell them. We don't even know the cost until we collect all the bids, and then we're still trying to shave costs. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do certainly do a lot of custom work. I've also, again, in terms of trying to increase uptake of this, I have done some work on what I call pocket production designs. So I've done some pre-designed high performance homes that can be mass customized, I'd say, but it's basically like a production home in terms of pre-designed, ideally optimized as it goes, but like that can be built in
right.
one-off locations. At least if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I want to build a few hundred or a few thousand of these," that'd be,
Would you go into factory production at that
yeah,
point? Would that be your
absolutely.
best control mechanism?
Yeah,
Right.
the reality is there's no way we're building ourselves out of a climate crisis with one-off custom buildings. It's just not going to happen. It never
Well,
has
even
happened.
stick building 100 homes on site in the middle of a desert is not, productive, but they do it continually, and there's no.
But 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 I guess what I'm saying is production housing is the answer, because you're just
Right. I agree with you. We just got to shift them over to a more efficient way to build, more systematically better performing. If you do it this way, they're just stuck in the old method of on-site stick building.
it's also frankly like where you got to show the value, realize that value. Like I think once that value proposition is clear, it's going to change very, very fast.
Yeah, I guess that's the crux of it. Is that's a big ship to turn. Even if you wanted them to get to from site stick built to factory delivered, whatever those are, either wall assemblies or whole modules or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a 180 turn, in my opinion. But just to steer that ship a little bit in the right direction is tricky. And you're right, exactly. It's all about the bottom line for them. It's not about the award or the certificate, or in my opinion, it's not about how many awards they collect or how great they look on a billboard. It's the bottom line.
Although
So that's
I was thinking about it this morning, and I was thinking about developers, right, and it all being about the bottom line, and of course it's not. I mean, you must, right? You have to attend to that, or you go out of business. But if
right.
that's all you attend to, what does it really matter at the
Yeah,
end of the day?
I
And what I
totally
was
agree
thinking
with you.
about
Yeah,
is like, what 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 developers does anyone know or remember? And the one I can think of is Eichler, right? Like, why do people remember that person? Why is he essentially immortal? Because he did more. He did more than just contend with the bottom line, right? He wanted to give people quality architecture, and and he also,
hmm,
maybe wasn't his main goal, but he was also a pioneer in terms of civil rights and home ownership. But
right.
like, aside from Eichler, if I say Eichler, people know who that. Or not, maybe not everyone does, but
I
people
know.
know who that is as a developer. Who else? Who else matters in history? Like, and if you want to matter in history, you need to do more than just try to make as much money as possible.
I agree wholeheartedly with you,
But
Graham.
I'm just
I
throwing
know.
that out in the universe, and I
I
was thinking
agree,
about that
but
this morning.
and I totally agree. And I think you're lucky in that you can talk to those individuals, even if it's that small developer who's still run by that one guy and his two sons or whatever, and then still an LLC or whatever, and they build 10 custom homes. They have that capability to have other things beyond the bottom. But the bigger players that I'm used to playing, even if you get the one executive who follows your compass reading to the T, he's still going to have purchasing and corporate and everybody behind him saying, "Oh no, you don't." So this is this weird dynamic of we know the if the right person heard the right words, they would make the right choice. But then it's that connecting the dots and then everybody around them agreeing with them and not telling him he's crazy. And yes, it doesn't matter about profits and all that.
Well,
Uh,
of course, it matters about profits, but
uh,
profits
right.
profits enough are don't matter. That isn't enough to justify human existence, and maybe
I
that's
know. I know.
problematic. But, and I'm not saying this is easy. It's obviously really hard, and
Yeah, it's tough.
the
And I
bigger
guess
the
that's what I was trying to
organization,
get you to, I
the bigger
guess
the
that's what I was trying to
organization.
get you to get to is there any way to convert or get the production builders in line? Because
Yeah,
they're always going to just stick to code. They're always just going to build to code. There's a few of I'm in a company now. We service the nationwide with third party inspections, and we serve most of the major builders. And only about 10% of our clientele it does Energy Star. So that's just a small portion of our own portfolio, and they too are just doing some good stuff and not enough good stuff. You know what I mean? So how do you get the other 90% if it's not code or regulated in some fashion, or or do you just let the pendulum do what it does?
well, the pendulum does what it does, but you maybe you get to nudge it a little and and do things that are meaningful for you. I mean, maybe that's a little self-oriented, but I mean, you want to spend your time doing things that are meaningful and make a meaningful life. So, yeah, the fact that your your influence isn't universal and you can't change the world instantly, yeah, that's a bummer. But if you
Right.
can wake up every day and feel like you did something to make the world a better place, or you're helping get that pendulum swing. And again, it'll be, you know, the day this is successful will be the day I'm doing nothing special,
Right. It'd
right?
just be another
I'll be
job,
just be
another
like, oh,
address.
okay, okay, what you okay? So you build buildings that perform like we build all buildings to perform, and
Right.
that'll be a happy challenge to have. But I mean, that's the definition of succeeding with this, right? Is it's no longer that challenge we were talking about up front, right? It's now
Right.
common practice, and um,
Are there places where it is that common, where they have that nirvana, where it's all just,
Yeah,
oh, that's just standard? I mean,
yeah,
but is it
Brussels.
a small portion of overall building worldwide, or is it
Yeah,
pretty
I think
widely accepted?
Brussels. Again, back to this report I was talking about, and I knew about this before. Like Brussels, Belgium went from one of the worst performing building portfolios in Europe to one of the best, and now passive house is code there. And they didn't
Was it
just.
because of that drastic, we're at the bottom, so we want to be at the top? Because I heard the same thing about Finland and their education system. It was really bad, and they decided to flip flop, and now they're one of the best. So is it this kind of, we're not going to go down that road again? It's very bad. We're going to make it really good. I mean, I'm
I
afraid that
don't.
we're
I
such in
mean,
the middle that we're not going to budge either way.
we're pretty bad, but um, I don't know what the motivation was. I do know that the way that they approached that was not just, hey, we're tomorrow, this is code. They actually got buy-in from the industry, through various methods, but they got the industry to buy into this, and by the time it was code, people were doing it anyway. So there are always going to be people that build, like, and that whole thing we always used to say from home performance, like building code building that's the worst building you can legally build. That's
Right.
a D, right? I mean, there will always be D builders, and developers and architects and everything else, right? And so code will have to push them along, and it will slowly, right? That will be pushing behind
You're right.
the very back. But there are people, there are all kinds of people, and that are really looking for that purpose and that meaning. And again, I don't pretend that it's simple. It sounds like I'm saying, oh, you just have to decide to do this. No, I know it's really, really difficult. But there are people that are working on this all the time. There are people that are figuring it out, and there are people that have just made it their mission to make things better.
Right. Yeah. Thank God that we have those kind of people that still have
Yeah,
that
and it's
passion
good
that
for
won't let it.
business too. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, and the other thing I was going to say is that, like, the people are doing what they're doing is producing products that people buy, right, or answering market demand. So
Mm-hmm.
if the market demands it, it will be there too, right? What if all of a sudden this podcast went out and just caught fire, and then everyone was like, oh, we need, I'll
Passive
pay
houses. Yeah.
twice. I'll pay twice for a house that has this level of performance than a code built house. Are you telling me that those wouldn't be getting
All the
cranked
builders
out?
are scrambling. How do you do
And
these? Right.
and twice might be an extreme, but you know what I'm saying? Like, if
Yes.
there's a strong sales pull,
Right.
from the
Right.
market, it'll get.
A market demand for the product. Well,
Yeah,
that's kind of, I mean, I've told you, I'm in the state of Alabama now, and there's not a whole lot of movement towards any of this. So there's not even on their radar. So we always wish that the market would demand and pull the train down the track. But some areas, there's nothing in front of the train. There are no tracks. There's nothing pulling them forward.
yeah,
As far
yes
as I
and
can see.
no.
And
Yes and no, but like, how many houses are sold without indoor plumbing, as an
true.
example?
Right, right.
So go back 50 years, there were plenty of houses without indoor plumbing. Now you'd be out of your mind. You could save a lot of money, right? Like, think of
Right.
how much money you could save on a house if you just put an outhouse behind it. You didn't have to plumb the whole. That's got to be a huge amount. And hey,
Right.
leave the electricity out too. No one would buy that, right? No matter where. Well, I mean, in maybe
Right.
some parts of the world or whatever, but like, those things now are standard assumptions, right? Indoor plumbing, you got to have indoor plumbing.
Yeah, everything takes a little bit of time to
Right.
advance and
But
move
I
forward.
mean,
Yeah.
like, do residential ventilation for indoor air quality. Why don't we
Yeah.
have? Why is that not in every building? I mean, that's like the best. That's the best thing you can have. I will tell you right now. Like, that is the best piece of this. Who cares? I mean, forget the environmental impact and forget comfort. I mean, all of it. Forget all that stuff. The best thing about this is fresh air in your house. Now, why is that not standard. Why is that not like plumbing, indoor plumbing, or electric lights?
Well, we hope it will be
It
someday,
will
right?
be.
Everything, just
But
like
again, you can
Energy
look at
Star
this,
keeps
right?
up,
You can
right?
stand back and look at it and say, well, what's going on? And like in 20 years, people will be like, what were they thinking? Like,
Right.
what? So I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think that's why it's important to keep those fires burning and keep pushing those officials. Hey, this isn't enough. You got to keep
Right?
pushing.
And maybe
And
assume, like, why
yeah,
not assume that this should be
I know.
like,
Do you see
don't
any conflict
apologize.
when you talk to clients or your people you're talking to between, uh, let's say they're thinking about passive house but not maybe getting certified, and green building? Is there any conflict in your mind of those two highways, or is it the same highway, same lanes, or does
Yeah,
one override the other? If you look at the green pie in its entirety, energy performance would be part of that pie. So maybe the passive house characteristics are built into the pie.
yeah, but the pie, yeah, but all green buildings, as you know, are not necessarily energy
That's
well
kind of what I
performing.
wanted you to maybe talk about. Is there characteristics that are combative between the two, or
They're not mutually exclusive, but they often are at odds. And
hmm,
I felt like that for me again before I discovered Passive House. It was really hard to feel like you could really get a hold of this performance thing in a compelling manner, right? I mean, it was kind of like, well, you should kind of. I mean, and again, I was sort of talking about this the feeling this answers all these questions. There'd be
hmm,
these classes on this, and this is good, and that's the other, and it's like, well, okay, they're good, but what? Like, how much? If this is good, is twice as much better? Is 10 times better? Like, there were no clear
right,
answers on that, and it felt like in the absence of a way to get hold of that technical side, and this is really what Passive House gave to the world and to architects, is a way to really get hold of that and make sense of it. People were just like,
study it and
it
analyze
doesn't
it
make
and
any sense,
change?
but
Right,
what's really green? Let's build, like, and I'm not knocking these things, but like, let's build out of straw or rammed earth or whatever. Yes, and those are very ecological, but like those things without any consideration for energy performance, uh, a straw
right,
bale house that performs like a code built house is going to use as much natural gas as any of them. And yes,
right,
there is some environmental savings on the upfront, but over the life of that building, it's dwarfed, in my
right.
opinion. So yeah, I think those concerns are laudable and important, but you have to have the science as well, and you have to gotta
And that's
think
what the
about.
PHP brought to the table, was
Yeah,
the
well, I mean,
the
the whole
analytics.
building performance in
Right,
general, right?
right,
So,
right.
so that's my thing about the green thing, right? Or like, yeah, it's really good to use low or no VOC paints, but is the house with all natural clay paint any better for the environment in its operation than the one that isn't? No, it's a piece of it. It's
Right,
important, but you
right,
got to really think big picture about this. And
right. And I guess so
in
that's
my
what the Build It Green tried to do with their certification model, is
yeah,
to recognize all those categories and
yeah,
grade you
and
on each
and
category.
I don't want to say that I don't think that's important. I really do think it's important,
Yeah.
but I feel like the piece that's not as accessible or as well known as how do we really optimize the performance of this building. But I mean, spend a lot of time and consideration making sure that the impact of construction is minimized as well.
Hmm.
So and I also do a lot of stuff with water efficiency and
Savings and
conservation and
efficiency.
reuse. I just think those things,
Right.
especially in
I,
California, that should just be standard construction. And doing it up front is pretty easy. Doing it later is really hard. So
right. Any of those things that we know about are really tricky to do post. What What do you know about today's architecture training and education track? Are they being more receptive? I hope so, to higher performance. They're introduced to passive house in school, so they know it when they come out. They can have that conversation. I mean, and I hope
Some
you're reaching
places,
out
yeah.
too in
Some places,
some
uh,
places.
yeah. I don't think it's seen. I don't think you're going to find an architect who would say that sustainability is a bad thing, right? No one is going to say that.
Yeah, right.
But awareness of it, and I think in
Walking
many
the walk.
cases it's seen as an inconvenience. Um,
That's kind of what I've been exposed to, that inconvenience part. They'll smile when they say it, but they'll still say it. That's why I was, because it also relates to kind of my family, which is the construction side. Is lots of great builders out there, but they don't know this stuff. And to get them to open the book or watch the video or read up on it or whatever is tricky. So even if you did change the code or change the mantra of the builder, you would still have this lack of an army who could fulfill. Maybe it depends on where you're standing, obviously, but right now that's even a problem here, just to get regular houses built, let alone passive or high performing houses. So there's
mhm.
lots of components to this conundrum we're in, but I'm just glad that folks like you are still out there fighting the fight and
Well,
pushing
you
us
too.
forward.
I'm.
Yeah.
You're the one. You're the one interviewing me.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you're
I want to
you're doing
expose
your
everybody,
thing.
as many people as I can, because it's such an important, pushed aside, consideration when you're building. If you're building one house or 1,000 houses, you're right, man. It doesn't matter. Uh, there's a way to do it right and a way to do it so. And most of us do it so. So if you're, let's say you're in a moderate climate, it's not the worst, it's not the best, but like you said before, there is some low hanging fruit. I mean, we're always pushing our builders to improve their air sealing, improve their wall insulation, whatever the common list is. And some are looking at HRV, ERV, but not very closely. They're still aligning with code, so that's a hard sell. But I agree with you. That's a very powerful piece of equipment. If you could replace the main unit, is that why you're saying it, or just in addition to
No,
the fresh air that you get to pump into the
because you
house?
just get fresh air.
Yeah,
I mean that you get fresh air. Get your bathrooms continuously ventilated. I mean, just those two things right there. Like,
right. The moisture buildup
sign
and
me up. I
yeah,
mean, just that. It's just people have no idea
yeah. I
that
was
it can be
so
differently.
bummed when California let that one slide and just let the California or the bathroom ventilation kind of fall
Yeah,
into
just
that
turn a
category.
bath
But
fan on.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah. Just mechanically
right,
induce leaks in your shell.
right. I mean, beyond the performance of the shell and the envelope and the equipment, what's your take on solar these days? A lot of my old pals are kind of flip flopping, and they were very much on the bandwagon early on to offset usage, etc. But now they're kind of worried about the middle, low, poor people that can't put solar on their roof, so their bills are gonna the ratio goes up, it doesn't go down as far as cost shared amongst all ratepayers.
I think that what Germany did with solar, with feed-in tariffs, that they they disconnected consumption and production,
Mm,
right? And it wasn't this thing of like, oh, if you use a whole lot of energy and you have money, then you can buy your way out of that. If it's a separate thing, they also made sure that there were community-based solar installations that were owned by the community. So
mm,
forget forget zeroing your energy bill with the solar system. You pay for what you use and you get paid for what you produce. And that would
right.
mean somebody that was very careful with their energy use but put a solar system on their house could actually make money doing it, or could buy a share or be given a share in their town's solar energy system.
You're talking about the system over there versus here.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I think that
that model.
addresses many of these equity concerns and the frankly the inverse incentive around this. I mean,
Yeah.
I would get calls all the time when oh, what's your, we're here from this solar company and blah, blah, blah. And what's your electric bill? And I would say, I don't know, it's $35 a month. And then there'd be a pause and then that'd be the end of it. Right.
Click, yeah.
I mean, it's
Not
almost
a good
like
customer.
you need to have high consumption to make this worthwhile. And you're actually rewarded in a perverse way for that. Right.
Right. And they typically ignore the other stuff that they could have done with the same amount of money
Right.
or less.
And I guess the other half, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I think, if it makes sense, do it. And it's not like putting more solar on the grid is a bad thing. It's good. Although we are getting to the point where it's sort of oversaturating at times because it all generates at the same time. And I guess in the big picture, I would say like in a societal point of view, we're going to have plenty of solar. There's going to be plenty of solar. What we need is efficiency and storage, and actually the nexus of those two things. That will be the value on a case by case basis.
Right.
And
well, I hope we can get there sometime.
We're going to, whether we like it or not, because the utilities can't sustain a business model of all this distributed generation. The whole thing is going to be problematic, and it's
so you'd be remapping the whole grid basically, or parts of it.
The way it's charged at least, and you're going to be paying a whole lot more for energy when the sun isn't shining than when it is, and that will change. Again, I would say, people will become aware of these things, because right now, utilities on a monopoly basis, the price to supply energy goes, it's wildly different from hour to hour and day to day. But the consumer doesn't see any of that because they just kind of average that out and parcel it out. But if you got distributed generation taking all the easy stuff away and leaving only the hard parts for the grid manager or the utility, that's not sustainable. Right. Be like, oh, you're running a business, and I don't just make something up, like as a contractor, right? Like doing kitchen remodels is really valuable, right? There's a lot of markup on that stuff, and what's a really tough side of things, like roofing. I don't know. Let's say that you're trying to run your business and someone comes in and takes away all your kitchen remodels and leaves you. I mean, and I'm not saying maybe as a GC, I know there are roofers that make a living, so this may be a weak analogy, but let's just say as a GC, you lose all the real high value stuff and you're just left with the low value part. Your whole costing approach has to change, or you're going out of business.
Yeah, they need a whole reevaluation of how they do things.
It's going to happen. I mean, like I said, there's times now where the price of electricity is going negative, meaning they have to pay people to take it. Like that, those kind of things can't continue.
Right.
And as there's more renewable on the grid, which is inevitable, not just even because of code, but because of the economies of scale of the whole thing. It's just the whole. And again, I'm just an architect, so what do I know about these things? But like, the people managing the grid know all this stuff, and it's going to be a tremendous challenge. And I don't see how it isn't. I don't see how time of use doesn't end up being passed along to the consumer. And once that happens, efficiency of your home is going to it's even like, and I know I'm running long, but I promise I'll.
No, it's okay.
Even like putting a battery, right? Like these batteries in your house, right? Like you can put a battery in your house and power your house for some period of time. Well, what benefit is there to that? Like if the power goes out, sure. But let's just say that electricity costs the same amount every hour of the day,
to
every
produce
day
it
of
or
the
to buy
year.
it. Yeah.
What financial benefit do you have to this battery? Now, if electricity gets really expensive in the afternoon and evening, and it's inexpensive at noon when there's a bunch of solar,
Right.
it starts making a whole lot of sense to charge that battery at noon and use that battery later in the day.
Right.
But right now, or to some degree, that incentive isn't there. But once that incentive's there, you're going to see a whole lot of batteries. You're also going to see a whole lot of high performing buildings where the
Yep.
building itself is the battery in terms of storing the heating and cooling, right? Like you can,
A thermal bank.
right? Thermal battery is what I like to say. Like
Yeah.
you can heat this thing or cool it when there's abundant power and just let it coast through those times when it's
Right.
when
Right.
the inefficient buildings, right? I mean, why is summer evening electricity like that's peak load in California? Why? Well, air conditioning, right? People come home and I mean, yeah, there's TVs and all that stuff, but it's really air conditioning. Well, if you have an efficient building that you don't need to turn your air conditioning on in the afternoon because it's already cool and it's going to stay cool through that, that's going to be worth a lot of money in the future.
Right. But we were always dependent upon that escalating utility pricing so that, when we showed them a financial analysis, it looks good on paper, but they always find a way to keep that number under control, just high enough where they'll tolerate the cost of energy. But you're right. As soon as it spikes up, people
And
will start
and
looking for
getting rid of
solutions.
natural gas is going to be tricky.
Yeah, we're already seeing buyers like, what the hell? My last month's utility bill was this, and now it's this, and I bought this new home. Oh, it's all electric. Oh, so that fuel shift is now a reality on pricing. So yeah, lots of things at play here.
Yeah, interesting times.
Yep. Well, Graham, thank you so much for enlightening us and sharing with us about Passive House and what that that's just some of the basic fundamentals of both Passive House and just high performance building. They're so easy to do if you just do them right and they're executed well and tested. A lot of this has to do with verification on the back end, right? You're still doing some amount of testing on the back end to assure things. And yeah, if we
Yeah,
can just get more people to adopt it, you're right.
and I mean, what my role and my job, and I was talking about messaging. My job is to get all that in there, but in a compelling and beautiful and inspiring building.
Because I was going to say, because your title as the architect is to preserve value, whether it's the aesthetic value or the performance value or the longevity value. That's kind of your charge as that gatekeeper, and I'm glad you really hold on to that. And because some people would have a different priority list, and you always seem to kind of put it in at least the right order, and it makes sense. And so that's what I like about you and your style. So thank you again, Graham. I really appreciate your time.
Thank
Take
you.
care and say hello to everybody for me, will you?
Will do.
All
All
right,
right.
then. See you, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.